All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our second lecture. This is our lecture on Dar al-Islam. I'll remind you right now that if you have not yet watched the lecture on the developments of East Asia, mainly China, I want you to go ahead and watch that one first. Make sure you get that done. Make sure you answer all the questions on the Ed puzzle and do what you have to do, and then come to this lecture. So this is still in Unit 1. We're still looking at the world from 1200 to 1450. So all of the things that are going on in this lecture today are going on around the same time as all the things that went on in the developments in East Asia lecture. Instead of focusing on Confucianism and Chinese culture, today we're going to focus on Dar al-Islam, which is really just another term for the Islamic world. We're really talking about the Middle East spreading all the way across North Africa and then getting just a little bit of Europe there with the southern part of Spain. I'll show you a map with all that in just a little bit, and we'll get into all the details there. But today we are looking at the Islamic faith and how it spread and what some of the similarities and differences are between Dar al-Islam and between China. So when you are looking at this, yes, I want you to take notes. Yes, I want you to learn the information, obviously, but you should be thinking, how is this similar to what I saw in our previous lecture? And how is this a little bit different than what I saw in our previous lecture? We're going to go ahead and skip the reading questions. We'll do that as class a little bit later. We'll look at the quote of the day here first, and then we'll get to our essential questions. So the quote of the day is, four things support the world: the learning of the wise, justice of the great, the prayers of the good, and the valor of the brave. That was said by Muhammad, who is the founder of Islam or the Muslim faith. What we're going to do today is we're going to see all of these things. We're going to see that there is learning in the Islamic world, that there is at least some sort of sense of justice or allowing, being tolerant, we'll say, being tolerant of people who have a different religion. We'll see the prayers of the good. That's a huge part of the Islamic religion. And then the valor of the brave. We'll see all of those things present, and we'll learn what is important for our study and maybe what isn't as important, at least for our study here in AP World History. Our essential questions are the same. Remember, the essential questions, these ones right up here, I can keep pointing to them like this, and yet that's not really going to do anyone any good. So follow the little red dot here. Remember, these are what and why. What are we learning, or what questions are we trying to answer? And they also tells us, why are we learning it? So we want to learn all the things that we need to today because we want to know, how do empires form, how do they expand, and how do they decline. Here's a hint. It's going to be pretty similar to what we saw in our previous lecture on the developments of East Asia. We're especially going to be looking at the Conrad-Demarest model again. So if you're not familiar with that model, please make sure you go back to the previous lecture, look at it. Or if you're a good student, you had all your Cornell notes, it should not be difficult to flip through your notebook, find your notes about the Conrad-Demarest model, and then go ahead and look at those there, because those are going to come up again. Number two, what methods do governments use to centralize power? We're going to see once again that Dar al-Islam is a highly centralized government. Now, it's going to run into some issues there, unlike what we saw in China, but still, it's very highly centralized, which is fairly similar to what we saw with the Song Dynasty. And number three, how does the development of culture create long-term impacts? What we're going to see is that when Islam was created in 622 in the Common Era, it spread very rapidly. Those areas it spread to are still Islamic today. And so we see the long-term impact of the actions of Muhammad and other believers of the Muslim faith. We should be able to explain the causes and effects of the rise of Islamic State. So once again, students will be able to, all of this has to do with what can you do. So if you can say at the end of this lecture, look, I can explain the causes and effects of the rise of the Islamic States. Perfect. You got that one down. Number two, identify technology and innovation created in Dar al-Islam. We'll be looking at the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. There's going to be a lot of different innovations. Not only should we be able to identify them, but we have to explain how the heck they got to Baghdad, where the House of Wisdom is, and what the effects of that trade and that technology are. And number three, explain how beliefs and religion play a role in social grouping. We're going to be looking at social organization. Remember, that was the blue box. When we're talking about our six major themes, the blue box was the one with SOI, social organization. And so we should be able to see how a society is organized and how societies are grouped together. I know my video is cutting it off a little bit here, but our proof of understanding is I can create context for the prompt. Last class, we looked at thesis. This class, we're going to be looking at context. We're not going to do that in this asynchronous learning that we're doing right here. We will do that in our synchronous session. But make sure that you're aware that when we get to our synchronous session, we're going to be working on something called context. And if you have context and thesis down by the end of our synchronous lesson, you're in really, really good shape. Let's go ahead and get started here. So we have just some facts about Islam. Once again, yes, these are good facts. We should know them. We should be aware of them. But I don't want you to think that this is what's going to be on the test. I'm never, ever, ever going to ask you who was the founder of Islam. It's just too basic of a question. You have to know who the founder of Islam is still. You still have to know that his name is Muhammad and they founded Islam in 622 CE, so 1,000 years after Confucius was alive. But if that's all you know, you are not going to do well on the test. You'll have to apply that particular knowledge that you have. So keep all of that in mind. Know the facts, but know how to apply those facts. And we're going to be practicing that throughout the year in order to prepare you for the exam. So as I said, Muhammad founded Islam in 622 CE. He was visited by God, and God told him that he was the final prophet. So Muhammad is the last prophet in this line of prophets that include Abraham and include Jesus. So the Islam is building upon the religions of Judaism and Christianity. And we'll study those two religions when we get to Europe in just a couple of lectures. But know that all three of those religions actually all use at least similar text in order to justify their faith, we'll say. So Muhammad is born in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia. He tries to preach. His beliefs, his Muslim beliefs to the people, and he's not really well received. He ends up going to Medina. Which is a city just a few miles away. He preaches. He is incredibly well received, and then he says, "You know what? We are going to use force. We're not going to ask the people to convert. They are going to convert." So he raises an army and converts the city of Mecca, and then ends up converting almost pretty much all of Saudi Arabia. And if you're not sure where that is, I'll show you on the map in just a little bit here. Now, do we need to know every single little detail of that battle? No. What we need to know is that Islam is going to spread incredibly quickly. One, because of military expansion. Like I just said, Muhammad's using an army to force people to convert to Islam. But then we're also going to see a variety of other reasons why Islam spreads from just being in Saudi Arabia to all the way over to Spain and almost all the way over. Actually, there are some instances in which Islam gets all the way over to India. Now, what are some of the basic beliefs here? The first basic belief is in Allah. Allah is the one true God. This actually makes it very, very easy to convert to Islam. In other religions, you have to go through an entire process in order to convert to, in order to be Muslim. It's very difficult. It takes years in order to convert. But with the Muslim faith, all you have to do if you want to convert is say, "I believe in Allah and I believe Muhammad is one true prophet." That's it. Now you've converted. We're going to see that that is a reason why Islam spreads so quickly. It's just because it's easy to. And we'll talk about the impacts of that spread of religion in just a little bit. Their holy text is the Quran. This is the word of God as dictated to Muhammad. And so, what we need to know, in addition to these things, is that Mecca is the holiest place in Islam. But then there's also some other major cities that play a key role in the Islamic faith as well. Medina is obviously going to be one of them. But Jerusalem, at the Dome of the Rock, it is believed that Muhammad ascended into heaven to meet with Allah before descending back down to earth to give the Quran to the people. What we're going to see in our European lecture is that Judaism and Christianity also think Jerusalem is an incredibly important city to them, which is why there's so much conflict in that area today. And so we're going to be talking about the sort in later units, we'll talk about the sources of conflict in the Middle East today, and I will trace it all the way back to the founding of Islam and Christianity and Judaism and all that. Let's go ahead and go on to the 5 pillars. These are the 5 pillars. These are the 5 things you have to do in order to be a good Muslim. Got to believe in Allah. You have to pray 5 times a day facing towards Mecca. You have to give to charity. You have to have a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is called a Hajj, and you have to fast during the month-long season of Ramadan. 4 of those, they're not, obviously they are important to people who are Muslim, but they're not important to us in terms of us trying to learn about world history. What we're going to focus on is this part right here. A pilgrimage is a journey that is made for a religious reason. So at least once in every Muslim's life, they must go to Mecca. They must travel there. That is a religious journey. They call this specific type of pilgrimage a Hajj. So a Hajj is just the name for the pilgrimage. And why this is important to us is that Islam promotes people traveling around. I mean, if people have to travel from places all over in order to get to Mecca, well, they're going to need to take goods with them. And they might run into many different types of people from many different types of cultures, and they may engage in trade. And that is a key thing to remember here, is that Islam is the religion of trade because they have given incentive, or really almost a demand, for people to move and to go on pilgrimages and to travel. Islam is going to spread rapidly. So it's not just the military expansion that we saw with Muhammad. It's not just the ease of converting to Islam. It's also this idea that many Muslims travel frequently because they have to make the Hajj to Mecca at least once in their life. And therefore, they're going to naturally trade with other people and see other people and bring along converts and bring along other Muslims who are going to convert non-Muslims to Islam. So we start to see why Islam can spread so quickly. We do need to talk about the different types of Islam here. We're not going to spend too much time on this, not right now. We will when we get to Unit 3, and then we will when we get to Unit 8, when we talk about all of the issues that are going on in the Middle East. There are 2 major different types of Islam. The first is Sunni. Sunni makes up a majority of the Muslim faith. So we're talking about 80 to 90% of all Muslims are Sunni Muslims. They believe that Abu Bakr is the right caliphate. When I say caliphate or caliph, I guess is actually the proper term. The caliph is the leader of the entire Muslim world. The caliphate is the entire world of the Islamic faith. So the caliph oversees the caliphate. And they believe that Abu Bakr was the correct caliph or caliph, depending on your pronunciation. And they believe that the leader of the Islamic world does not need to be a direct descendant of Muhammad. Shia, on the other hand, they make up about 10% of the Muslim world, and they believe in Ali Talib, who they believe that he was the correct caliph, and they believe that in order to be a caliph, in order to be the head of the caliphate, you must be a direct descendant of Muhammad. I know to non-Muslims that seems like a very, very minor distinction, but it's huge. It has huge implications because the Sunnis believe that they are right and the Shia believe that they are right. And this has led to many, many conflicts. So once again, we're not going to talk about it now, but when we get to the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire, we'll talk more about it then. Just know that there are different sects of Islam. They're Sunni and they're Shia, and that's going to cause a whole lot of conflict. We will talk about the Sufis, though. So in the area of Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East, there were many very local religions. I mean, these were religions that we don't really study, that we really don't know that much about because they're not big worldwide religions. Well, as we saw in our developments in East Asia lecture, we saw that when Buddhism came into China, it didn't kick out Confucianism. It blended with Confucianism. It engaged in syncretism. The people of China took their Confucius beliefs, took the Buddhist beliefs, and said, you know what? Why not? Why not both? Why don't we have both? That's what's happening here with the Sufis. I mean, these Muslim traders are trying to convert them, and the Sufis say, well, we already have this local religion, so why don't we just kind of combine some of our local beliefs and customs and religion with this Islamic faith, because that seems pretty cool. And now we have kind of this new hybrid of sorts. So once again, we're seeing more and more examples of syncretism. And because Islam isn't as strict, I mean, obviously there are some very, very strict versions of the Islamic faith, one that you have to follow every single rule to the T. You cannot break any of them. Those rules do not bend at all. There are some Muslims who are willing to bend the rules a little bit. And they're willing to say, well, okay, I mean, this rule is important. You have to follow this. You have to believe in Allah and you have to believe in Muhammad. But if you don't want to take part in every single custom, or you want to do your custom a little different way, that's totally fine. And this increases the amount of people who convert. And so we're seeing this cultural development. Remember, that's why I put this little box up here, CDI, cultural development. We're seeing how culture is going to develop, and then why or how it plays a huge role in society for the long term. So this is the map that I was referring to earlier. So I know, once again, my little video is in the way. This is expansion under Muhammad. So Mecca goes up to Medina. Eventually, by the time of the death of Muhammad, this brown area has most people in it have converted to Islam. Islam explodes in size after the death of Muhammad. It goes all the way west, even getting to modern day Spain and Portugal, and then goes east, getting to India, and then actually we'll eventually look at the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal dynasty takes over the kind of the northern part of India, what is now today Pakistan and North India as well. So you can see that it an incredible expansion. Now, this expansion happens, as I said, because of military expansion, especially this area in the beginning with Muhammad, but then also because of trade and the easiness of conversion to Islam. These Islamic merchants would trade with people all the way over here, and as they trade, they spread their religion. And we'll discuss that in more detail in Unit 2. We'll see the profound impacts that trade has more than just an exchange of goods, because it's an exchange of ideas and customs and cultures and everything that makes up a society. But know that trading is the reason, at least one of the reasons, why the religion of Islam spreads so quickly. Now, what we have to look at is the rise of Dar al Islam. We're going to look at this at least a little more specifically. The name of the government, the name of the state that we have here, is the Abbasid Caliphate. They're going to start in about 750. So we're talking 100 years or so after the death of Muhammad, and they will last until 1258. Now, they're going to fall apart in 1258 for the same exact reason that the Song dynasty falls apart in 1279. So know that in Unit 2, we're going to be looking at something huge because this big monolithic animal or something, some sort of force is going to destroy the Abbasid Caliphate and the Song dynasty. Both are things that we have said are incredibly strong. We've said the Abbasid Caliphate is strong. We've said the Song dynasty is strong. And yet this thing coming for them is even stronger. But let's look back at this Conrad-Demarest model to talk about how the Abbasid Caliphate becomes the Abbasid Caliphate. First of all, they're going to bring small societies together. That's number one, Conrad-Demarest model. A bunch of small societies, they're all separate from one another, they're brought together. Number two is that you had to have a leader, and that leader had to make the people identify with the state. So people identify with the state because of Islam. The state, the government says, we are Islam. You guys are all in the same exact religion, so we're all together. We're all in one society, and people identify with that. So that's how people are brought together in this regard. So in the same way that the Song dynasty brought people together via Confucianism, the Abbasid Caliphate is going to bring people together via Islam. Religion is a very powerful force amongst the people, especially at this time, and even still today. Number three was about expanding. and expanding, but also providing for the people. So, how is it that the Abbasid Caliphate is making enough money in order to provide all these good things for the people? And we'll talk about what those good things are in just a little bit. Well, as the Abbasid Caliphate takes over, so remember, we're starting here, Mecca, Medina, starting right around here in Saudi Arabia, and expanding this way and expanding this way to the west and to the east. They're going to run into people who are not Muslim, mainly Jews and Christians. Now, those Jews and Christians could convert if they wanted to. They could convert, and it would be really easy to convert because all you have to do is believe in Allah and say that Muhammad's the one true prophet. But let's say you don't want to. Let's say you are very stuck on your religion of Judaism or Christianity, and you say, there's no way I am converting. Okay, that's fine. Since you're a non-Muslim, you have to pay a tax. It is called the jizya, and you have to pay this tax to the Abbasid Caliphate. And the Abbasid Caliphate is going to take that money and they're going to spend it on good things like the House of Wisdom that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So if you don't know what the House of Wisdom is, that's fine. We'll talk about that in just a second here. Number four here is that eventually, we talked about why the Abbas, or we're going to talk about why the Abbasid Caliphate falls apart in 1258. But one of the reasons is that does become too large, and people are just going to stop paying taxes. And I'll actually talk more about that when we get to the Mamluks on the next slide here. Essentially, as we saw in the Conrad-Demarest model, you just become too large. You can't control everyone. People say, I'm not going to pay taxes, and then you fall apart. But we'll talk about the ending of the Abbasid Caliphate a bit more when we get to Unit 2. The last part down there is that this is considered the golden age of Islam. This is Islam at its height because it is so powerful, it's so large, and it's wonderful. And as we'll see with the House of Wisdom in Baghdad in just a little bit, we'll see how wonderful it is. Now, what I do want to point out, because this is going to be important for Unit 2, is that this highly centralized society, it's the same thing with the song Dynasty. This highly centralized society makes it significantly easier to trade. And here's the reason why. One, when you have a centralized society, you have more protection. If you're a trader from Morocco all the way over here, you know that as long as you stay within the Abbasid Caliphate right here, you are going to be safe and you can go all the way to Baghdad and you can trade. And then you can come all the way back to Morocco, way over here, and you're safe. You don't have to worry. If you had to worry, if you're like, oh, I don't know if these trade routes are safe, then you wouldn't trade. So that's one thing. The second is with taxes. Now, if you're from, let's use Morocco again, if you're from Morocco, and instead of having this highly centralized society where everyone is unified, everyone's under one government, one rule, you would have to travel through multiple nations if you did not have this highly centralized society. And every time you travel through another nation, you would have to pay more taxes. So you would travel through a nation, well, now you got to pay a tax. You would travel through another nation, now you got to pay a tax. Now you got to travel through this country, now you got to pay a tax. Then you would finally get here, you have to pay a tax, and then you get to trade. And then if you want to go back so you can sell all the goods you got to pay taxes all the way back around. Well, that's an incentive to not trade. I mean, if you told me that I have to pay a tax every single time I want to trade something, or every single time I walk somewhere, well, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm just going to stay right here. I don't have that much money. I can't pay a tax every single time. So what we see is that this highly centralized society makes it easier to trade, and therefore more people are going to trade. And when we get to Unit 2, we're going to see the huge benefits of trade. I'm sure you can already imagine what the benefits of trade are. And so we'll see those much more clearly when we get to Unit 2. Now, the two major trade routes that are going to be running through, especially Baghdad and the Abbasid Caliphate, are the Silk Road, which is going to be all of Eurasia. So we're talking Europe and then going way off the map over here to China, pretty much. But we're also going to see the trans-Saharan trade, where we go from, once again, Baghdad or Mecca, Medina, this area, down through the Saharan desert to the western part of Africa where the Mali Empire is. So when we say that Baghdad is at the crossroads of two major trade routes, we really mean that. I mean, the major trade routes of the Silk Road and the Trans-Saharan trade run through Baghdad. And so Baghdad and the surrounding areas are going to have an incredible amount of wealth and technology and trade and all of that beneficial, positive, good stuff. Let's go ahead and move on to the other Islamic empires. I'm not going to talk about the Seljuks right now. Just know that there are Muslims other than those in the Abbasid Caliphate. The Seljuks really coming from the east of the Abbasid Caliphate and are eventually going to invade the Byzantine Empire, which hopefully you talked about in eighth grade. If not, I'll talk about it more when we study the Crusades, because that's where the Seljuk Empire really matters when it, at least to our study in AP world here. The Egyptian Mamluk Sultanate. So they exist right here in Egypt. That's why they're called the Egyptian Sultanate there. They are former military slaves who served as soldiers and bureaucrats and eventually controlled this government. So you might say, well, wait a second. The Abbasid Caliphate controlled this area right here. How did the Mamluk Empire end up controlling that area? One, the Abbasid Caliphate is very close to its deathbed at this point. I mean, 1250. It's 8 years away from the Abbasid Caliphate being destroyed. But as we saw with the Conrad-Demarest Model number 4, sometimes an empire gets too large and they literally cannot make people pay their taxes. It's almost as if, I mean, to use a hypothetical situation here, let's say I'm sleeping on a Saturday. Saturday morning, I'm sleeping in. My plan is to just sleep till 10, 11, 1 p.m. Done that. All right. It's Saturday. It's my day. I get to do what I want. But Dr. Kuzma calls me at 6 in the morning and my phone goes off. And so I have to pick it up. And yeah, what? What do you want, Dr. Kuzma? And Dr. Kuzma says, Cernak, I know it's Saturday. I know that it's like your day off, but you have to come in. You got to drive all the way over to Rancho High School. You have to come in and you have to work today. You have to do it. I have two choices. I could say, okay, Dr. Kuzma, give me 20 minutes. Let me get some water on my face. Let me wake myself up, get on a shirt and tie, everything, and I'll be right over. Or I could say to Dr. Kuzma, make me and then go right back to bed. Because what's Dr. Kuzma going to do? He's going to hop in his car. He's going to drive to my house. He's got to figure out where I live. He's going to knock on my door. I'm not going to answer it. So now he's got to break in. He's got to find me in the room. He's got to drag me out of bed, put me in his car, and drive me all the way to Rancho. He's not going to do that. And that's what the Mamluks do to the Abbasid Caliphate. The Mamluks are right about here. The Abbasid Caliphate is centered here in Baghdad. The Mamluk Sultanate says, you want us to pay taxes to you guys? Make me. Make us pay taxes to you then. Come down here with your army and try to fight us. And the Abbasid Caliphate at this point is very weak. They don't really have a huge army, especially one, and they don't have an army that can go against these former military slaves who are very good fighters. And so the Abbasid Caliphate says, I guess there's nothing we can do. And so other parts of the empire also feel that way. They say, well, if the Mamluks aren't paying taxes and we're not paying taxes either, and you can start to see why the Abbasid Caliphate is going to fall apart. If you don't have money, you can't buy things, you can't please the people of your empire, and they're going to rebel against you. And what we'll see is that 8 years later in 1258, they're not going to have a big enough army to stop whatever is coming at them, as we'll talk about in Unit 2. Let's go ahead and look at Spain right here. So Spain, let's go back to the map. Baghdad's here. That's what we're talking about. That's what we were talking about. We'll talk about that again in just a second. Going all the way over here, long ways away, Spain, right here. That's where we are. So the Muslims reach Spain, and this is going to be important for us to remember in Unit 3 and in Unit 4, because in Unit 3 and 4, we're going to see that the Muslims will be driven out of Spain, and we're going to see why that happens, and we're also going to see what the effects of that are. So we call the Muslims in Spain the Umayyads. If you put Umayyads on your test, cool. Someone, one of the readers will be very, very impressed with your ability to know that. If you just say, hey, there were Muslims in Spain and they were called Moors, That's good too. Okay. Know that there are Muslims in Spain. I'll refer to them as the Moors. That way we know that we are specifically talking about Muslims in Spain as opposed to Muslims anywhere else in Dar al Islam. This makes it when the Muslims show up, this makes three monotheistic groups, three religious groups who only believe in one God, all in Spain: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. These three are not going to engage in syncretism, at least not on a religious level. We'll talk about the architecture in just a second, but it's not like you're going to take Christian elements and combine them with Islamic elements. Those two do not mix. They're like oil and water. That's going to be important for us to remember, not now, but in Unit 3 and Unit 4. What the Muslims do, what the Moors do at this time, is that they're going to bring trade. What we're going to see on our next slide is that the Muslim world has access to all of the technology that we talked about with the developments in East Asia. We talked about the compass, we talked about the astrolabe, we talked about the Chinese junk, we talked about woodblock printing, we talked about paper, we talked about silk. All of those things are going to eventually get to Spain and the rest of Europe via the Muslim world. Because as you can see, if the Muslims have all those things from the east, as they extend all the way to the east, there's not much stopping them from going all the way to the west via trade and then getting into Europe that way. And so when we get to Unit 2 and we look at the Renaissance, you have to be able to say, if I ask you why did the Renaissance occur, you have to be able to say, well, the reason Europe has all of this technology to engage in the Renaissance is because they traded with the Islamic world, and the reason the Islamic world had it is because they could trade with China and India. I'll rehash that again when we get to Unit 2, and we'll talk about it once again. The Muslims, in addition to bringing all this trade and technology, are also just going to bring knowledge to Cordoba, which is a city in Spain. And so all of this knowledge from the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, all of this is going to be brought to Spain via Dar al-Islam. Now, if you look at the architecture over here, I would imagine that I do not have any architecture junkies in the class. If I do, then you'll be very interested in this. What we see with this architecture is that this was originally built to be a Catholic church in Spain. But when the Moors came in, they took over that Catholic church and made it into a mosque. So nowadays, it's still called the Church of Cordoba. But it does highlight, if you actually go there and look at it, it does highlight the fact that it used to be a mosque when the Moors were in Spain. But what we see here is that this is traditional Catholic architecture, but then it's also combined with more of this Arabic and Muslim architecture as well. So this is another example of syncretism. Remember, syncretism isn't just religion. When we get to our study of Africa, we're going to see a syncretism of language. And right now in Spain, we're seeing a syncretism of architecture. Let's go ahead and move on to the technology and innovation of the Abbasid Caliphate. I've mentioned this a couple times already, so you know it's important. I mean, you have to realize that when I mention something multiple times, it must be important in some way, shape, or form. And this is especially important in terms of technology. We want to know what type of technology exists in the Islamic world, but we also want to know how it got there and what the effects of that technology are. So we see many cases of multiple cases of mathematical development. So the reason that you're eventually going to have to study trigonometry, the reason you have to sit in an algebra class and take a bunch of notes and struggle through that. Uh, Thank you, Muslim world. Nasal al-Din and Muhammad ibn Musa both created different aspects of mathematics. So you see trigonometry and algebra there. So that is bringing knowledge of mathematics and the understanding of the world, mathematically at least, to the Islamic world. Where are they getting this information from? Well, they're getting it from the East. They're getting it from China. They're getting it from India because of the trade routes. Remember, we talked about the Abbasid Caliphate so big that it causes these trade routes to occur. Baghdad's right in the center of that. So all of those travelers from the East, when they come in and trade in Baghdad, they're bringing that mathematical knowledge with them. When Mansa Musa from the Mali Empire comes up through the Trans-Saharan trade route to Baghdad or to Mecca or to that area, he's bringing with him mathematical knowledge as well. So that mathematical knowledge is centered in Baghdad because of the trade routes. And when the Europeans eventually come in and they trade in Baghdad, they're going to bring that mathematical knowledge back to Europe. That is how Europe eventually gained all of the technology that is necessary for them to engage in the Renaissance and engage in the age of exploration that we will talk about in Unit 4. In addition to mathematical knowledge, medicinal knowledge. So there's going to be writings on smallpox, infections, how to do surgery. As I previously mentioned, this is eventually going to be diffused to Europe and going to be the reason that they are able to engage in the Renaissance, which is this intellectual this time period of intellectual fervor within the continent of Europe. I don't want to say the Empire of Europe because they don't really have empires, at least not yet. And we'll talk about that more when we get to our lecture on Europe. They bring observatories as well. So not only are they looking mathematically and medicinally, but they're also looking at space. So Nicholas Copernicus and Galileo Galilei, who are famous European scientists who viewed space, well, they owe a debt to the people in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, because the scientists in the House of Wisdom observed the sun and the moon and the planets. They measured their circumference of the earth. They did all of those mathematical things and scientific things in order to lay the groundwork for some of those big European minds like Galileo and like Nicholas Copernicus, who we'll talk about a little bit later. And then they preserved and translated some of the Greek philosophy. So the reason we have the works of Aristotle and Plato and other major Greek philosophers, well, thank you, Abbasid Caliphate. They found that it was incredibly important to have this education in order to improve their society. We will see that this will be destroyed in 1258 as well. So hang on for Unit 2 to figure out why or what is going to come in and absolutely destroy this amazing House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Now we need to talk about society. So we're talking about social organization, and we're talking about culture as well. There are high levels of social inequality, and this is something that should be going off your head. When you see something like this, it's not just, oh, women are given few rights. You should be thinking, wait a second, we talked about women last class, and we talked about how in Confucian society, women were seen as inferior. This seems very, very similar to that. That is called comparison, and that is a really, really good thing to do. If you can compare things in your essays, you're going to score a whole lot of points. So make sure you are doing that. You have to see the comparisons and the contrast between these societies. So as I said, women are given very few rights. They have to veil themselves. Men can have multiple wives, women cannot. So we see that women are very much treated as inferior, very similar to Confucianism. Slavery, you were not allowed to enslave other Muslims. And so you can look at this in multiple ways. One, they're not engaging in a slavery, at least not slavery on a wide scale. But two, this is going to lead to more converts. I mean, if I'm a non-Muslim and you are a Muslim and you come knock on my door and you say, you're going to be a slave unless you convert to Islam and you believe that Allah is the one true God, I'm going to start praying 5 times a day. And I'm going to start facing Mecca and I'm going to start saying, praise be to Allah, because I don't want to be a slave. So this gives an incentive for people to convert to Islam, which is another reason why Islam grows so quickly. So make sure you keep that in mind. Make sure you keep in mind the trade, the militarism, the easy conversion. All those things are the reasons why Islam is the second largest religion in the world. In addition to this, we can see that there is some sort of a hierarchy. Muslims are clearly at the top, and then other religions are clearly below that. I mean, Christians and Jews had to pay a tax, and while the people of the Islamic faith did not have to pay that tax. Now, for the most part, we see that in the Abbasid Caliphate, and when we look at like the Ottoman Empire in Unit 3, we're going to see that they are very tolerant of people of other religions. As long as you pay your taxes, as long as you don't try to fight against the system too much, you want to go to church, you want to go to the synagogue, you want to be Christian or Jewish, go right ahead. And this is actually going to be a major theme that we'll see throughout our study of world history. You would assume that if a conquering society came in, this big, strong, powerful empire took over some land, you would assume that they would impose their culture upon that land. You would assume they would say, we're the dominant ones, you're the weak ones, everything we do, that's what you're doing now. Don't ask any questions. But that's not really how it happens, especially with very successful empires. And the Roman Empire from the ancient world is one example of this. The reason that these societies want to be tolerant, the reasons that the governments, I say, should be tolerant, is because if you're tolerant of people's religions or their language or their culture, then they're less likely to rebel. I mean, let's imagine that you were here in school, you were here in the classroom, and I said, all right, I'm the king of this class. It's my name on the door out there. I'm the one in charge. All you have to obey my culture. I wear a shirt and tie every single day, and everyone's doing it. Otherwise, you're getting in trouble. Well, you'd be mad. A lot of you would say, I'm not wearing a shirt and tie. I don't want to feel like I'm choking the entire class. No, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. And you might rebel against me. You might start, bringing up your fist and start trying to fight me. Now I'm a big guy. I am. I am. I'm 6 foot two. I'm a tall guy. I got a little height advantage. But if there's 40 of you in a class and all of you are on the same team against me, I'm not winning. That's the way it is. And that's why the Abbasid Caliphate and later the Ottoman Empire and other empires don't want to always impose their culture upon others because they don't want to rebel. So that's going to be a theme. We're going to see that time and time again, but we'll actually also see the opposite of that. We'll see Spain. We'll even see the Mughal dynasty under Aurangzeb, in which there is a lack of tolerance, in which both of those societies say, you better obey our religion, our culture, our faith, our everything. Otherwise, we're kicking you out. And we'll see that in some cases that works, and in other cases it doesn't. So this debate on, well, should a society be tolerant or not, is something that you can write about and something that is incredibly complex because you have multiple examples of each, and you could argue on either side. When we get a little more into the year, we'll study that a little more complexly and understand that. But know that we're going to be looking at religious tolerance or culture tolerance and cultural intolerance throughout the year. Let's go ahead and we've already talked about conversion. Let's go ahead and move on here and we're done. We are going to do this projector quiz in class. We're going to talk all about context and we're going to review thesis as well. We'll do that during our synchronous session, so you do not have to do this now. So ladies and gentlemen, make sure that you look at those notes on your off day. Make sure you go ahead and fill out that summary section as well, just so that way you're looking at the information again and you're truly understanding it. If you have questions, contact me. My email is on Canvas. You can leave something on the Google Classroom. Any way you can contact me, I will be more than happy to answer your question. And you can always ask a question during our synchronous sessions as well. So make sure you do take advantage of that. If you have to go back and watch the video, go ahead and do that. Rewind, watch it, do whatever it is that you need to do. And I will see you next time for our study about the developments in Southeast Asia.